All right, class. First off, as always, a good day. I'm glad you're here. Today, we are going to be talking about the power of the veto that the president has, the succession, and we're going to be talking about uh, the executive privileges and things like that of the president. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So the objective today, we're going to analyze again the president having the power to veto, examine the significance of giving the president the power to negotiate treaties, and we're going to create an argument on the extent of executive privileges of the president. Okay. So here is your warm-up picture. All right. Now, this guy, Mitch McConnell, the one that says majority leader, he's saying, look what's going on my desk. The thing is, this guy is a political rival of Obama. He's a Republican. And he basically stated that when he's a majority leader, everything that goes through the Senate and stuff like that, because he's a majority leader, is going to be Republican stuff. And Obama is saying, look what's coming out of my drawer, which is, if you can read it backwards, um, but if you can't, it says veto. Okay, so first one, what's happening here? Second question is asking, what do you think this artist is trying to say? You know, so pause the video, write your response, okay, because we're moving on in three, two, one. Now, the president is authorized to propose legislation. Now, what is legislation? Legislation is a fancy word for saying law. That's basically it. All right. Um, Simple translation, law. Now, a president usually outlines their administration's agenda, what they want to do for the year, things like that, at the State of the Union address, which is given a joint session of Congress. Both the House of Representatives and the Senate show up. This is typically done each January, February. Does it have to be? Not necessarily. Okay, but we'll get to that later on. Um, but yeah, so they basically say how the country is doing, what they plan to do, and things like that. Okay. And it's usually met with cheers or quietness and things like that. It just depends on who's talking and if both parties liked what's being said or not. Now, one of the president's power is a thing called the veto power. The veto power is an important check on Congress because remember, Congress makes laws. Their job is to create laws, and it's the power of the president to basically enforce those laws. But if the president looks at the law and says, I don't like that, that law makes no sense, or that law is not right, that law is aiming at certain people, not every American, he has the power to veto it. Okay? Which basically means he gets to reject it. Now, just because the president rejects it doesn't mean that the law is dead. Okay? What happens is that bill, it goes back to the House of Representatives, it goes back to the Senate. And if they can get 2/3 vote majority, then it becomes law automatically. And the president can't veto it again. Okay, but here is the little kicker. If the president vetoes it and it goes back to the House of Senate or the House of Representatives and the Senate, um, if they even change one word, technically that's a new law. And if they authorize it and it goes to the president, they're like, oh, yeah, we got to pass. No, 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 that's a new law. You changed it. So now it comes back to the president, and the president can then veto it if he wants to. Okay. So, yeah, even if they change one word, technically that's a new law. Okay. But, yeah, if they get the 2/3 in both the House of Representatives and the Senate, which is pretty difficult, if they do get that, then it becomes law without changing the bill that the president vetoed. Okay, the president, excuse me, has to veto it, and it has to be the same exact document, no changes, not even a comma, for crying out loud. And then if it goes by gets 2/3, then it becomes law. Now, The president has this thing called the pocket veto, which is pretty interesting. The president has 30 days to sign a bill or else it becomes law. Okay, so a bill comes to his office, sits on the corner, and basically he has 30 days to read it and sign it. If he doesn't sign it in the 30 days has already gone through, then it becomes law. Um, but like I told my classes, you know, uh, Congress is kind of like you guys. They have a start date and an end date. Then they go on break and things like that. So what the president, sometimes what they'll do is like if there's 24 days left in the Congress session and they bring out a new law to him, he could just let it wait because that 30 days has to be during the time when Congress is in session. So if there's 24 days and he has 30 days to sign that paper, he could just, if he doesn't want to sign it, he could just let it sit there and let it die. He could do that. Or what some presidents have done is like if the Congress gives him the bill and there's like 30 days left, exactly like 30 days, what the president will do is like wait till the 29th day, veto it, and there's like several hours that Congress has to get everyone together to vote on it. They're not going to do that. They can't do that. It's impossible. So it basically gives them the Congress little to no time to get everyone together and vote on it again and things like that. Um, it just, yeah, it's not going to happen. So that's why they call it a pocket veto. Where the president basically guarantees this is not going to be law. Okay. All right. So here's my question to you. The thing is, the president does have an unlimited amount of vetoes. Every time there's a new bill, the president can veto it. So do you think the president should have an unlimited amount of vetoes, or should they be limited to, let's say, 75? A student asked me in class, well, how many bills are being passed? Quite a bit, actually. You'd be surprised. There's several hundreds um, bills that are passed every year, or yeah, they pass through the Congress every year. And should the president have a set number of vetoes, or should they have a limited amount of vetoes? You know, and explain. You know, so if it's limited, how much would you limit them to, and why is that number fair? If not, why shouldn't they have a limited number? Explain. Okay. So pause the video, write your response because we're moving on in 3, 2, 1. All right. So inherent powers. These are things that can be referred to the Constitution. Okay. Based on the role of the Constitution given the president for foreign policy, the president can appoint and receive ambassadors. When a new president comes into power, he can either keep the same ambassadors who are in France and Turkey and India. He can keep them. He can say, "Yeah, you know what? You're doing a good job. You know, I know you work for my rival, my other political opponent, but I like what you're doing. If you want, you can stay there if you want." They can do that, or they can say, I don't want you there. You know, come back. You're fired, and they get to appoint someone else. Also, they can take in ambassadors from another country. Let's say Australia says, "Hey, we want an embassy, in America, um, and we want to send this ambassador over." The president can say yes or no. Okay, the president has that right to say yes or no. Uh, like I've told my classes, um, if you're ever in trouble in another country, you should really look for the U.S. embassy and go there. Okay, because that's basically home in another country. That land, that territory, that is American land, that is American territory. So once you cross in there, if the cops are after you for whatever reason, they can't set foot in there. Okay. Now, the next part, executive agreement. This is something set with other countries that does require the Senate's approval. The Supreme Court Supreme Court ruled that these agreements are within the inherent power of the president. So, like right now, with Biden saying, "Hey, I'm making an agreement with Ukraine, saying we're going to help you out with military weapons, with food, and things like that." The Senate might be up in arms, like, "No, no, no, you can't do that. You can't do that." Yeah, he can because he has an agreement with another country. When if we agree saying, "Hey, we're going to pay back our loan to you that we took out 20 some years ago, we're going to pay it off this year." Um, the Senate can't say anything because again, that is an agreement between the United States and the country that the president made. Okay. Now we're gonna get to the really, really interesting stuff. Executive orders. This is an order, a rule, a declaration by the president that has the same power as a law and requires no action from Congress or the state legislature. So when Obama was president and he wanted to get his affordable health care bill passed, and Congress, which was run by Mitch McConnell, that guy from the warm-up picture, um, he kept saying no, no. He made sure that his political party said no, and since they had the majority, since they had the numbers of people in Congress, the bill could not pass. So Obama really, really wanted to get the affordable health care bill passed. So he basically used his executive order and passed it. So he tried to go through the right channels, but when it didn't pass because of politics, he used the executive order. Okay. Trump did the same thing, but this time it was about the pandemic when he did the quarantine enforced. If you're not in essential business, you need to be quarantined. People need to stay home, things like that. All that stuff. That was an executive order. Okay. Now, here's the thing about the executive orders, executive privileges. Presidents decide when information developed within the executive branch cannot be released to Congress or the courts. It's a claim that executive privilege is based on separation of power, that they need to protect dip, diplomatic and military secrets, and that the notion that people around the president must feel safe or free to give him advice on things. Okay, so there's some things that the president does that we don't know about. We can't get information on that because they just zip their mouth and say executive privileges, and that's it. That's it. There's nothing we can do to get it. One of the better examples of executive privilege would be Richard Nixon. Nixon had tapes when he took office. He had tapes and wires. Basically, he bugged his own Oval Office. So whenever he had meetings, people would be recorded on it. Okay. In one of those tapes, he talks to some of his advisors, telling them, "We need to find out what the Democrats are planning, for the reelection. What dirt do they have on me? What's their strategy? What place are they going to hit next? Stuff like that." So he had his men hire other men to break into the Democratic headquarters at the Watergate Hotel and find out all this information. Well, those burglars got caught. And these two reporters, Woodward and Bernstein, they followed the trail and they basically found out that, yeah, these top government official guys hired these guys and that these guys were ordered by the president. And then when things start getting serious, the Department of Justice, Congress was wanted to talk to these guys, and they would tell them, "Well, I'm innocent. I didn't do it. You could just listen to the tapes." And the Congress was like, "What tapes? What are you talking about?" And that's when they told him he records everything that happens in the Oval Office. So now Congress and the courts are like, "Well, we want to hear these tapes." Nixon was like, "No, no, 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 you can't listen to those tapes. That's executive privilege, There's diplomatic and military secrets." And the courts basically said, "No, you are being accused of something that's illegal. That's an abuse of your powers. So, no, this executive privilege is no, because if you're found guilty, that could be lead to impeachment. So the potential that you have abused your power. So we need those tapes. And in those tapes, he turned them over, but there's like 15 minutes in one part that's completely erased. Nobody knows what's on it. Still to this day, we don't know what's on it. Even with our technology, as advanced as it is, we can't hear anything on that thing. It's completely blanked out. So here's your next question. What is your opinion on the executive privilege clause? Do you think a president should be able to use this at any time whenever they deem it necessary? Or should they have to justify it, explain, okay, well, I can't really tell you why about this because, and they have to explain that part. They don't have to tell us what it is, but they have to explain why we can't know this information. So what do you think? So pause the video, write your response, okay, because we're moving on in 3, 2, 1. All right. So the line of succession. When the president dies, we all know the vice president is next. But who's after that? Okay, that's a question I get a lot of times from students. The next person in line is the Speaker of the House, and then the President pro tem to the Senate, and then the Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury, Defense, Attorney General, Secretary of Interior, of Agriculture, of Commerce, of Labor, and so on and so forth. Okay, so it's quite a list. Now, how is this list chosen? I wish I would say it's by the most important to the least important, but it's not. Basically, how it was created was they looked at the top jobs in the executive office. Who these people, who do these people represent the people, in the Senate and the House of Representatives, things like that. And then after that, it's like, well, who's in the cabinet? The first job that was created was Secretary of State. The second was Treasury, and then Defense and Attorney General. And every new job that has been created since was just added to the list. So the very bottom of this list is the Secretary of Homeland Security. Does it mean that his job is less important than the Secretary of Health and Human Services? No, it's just that the Homeland Security job was added in 2003. So that's way, 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 way down the list. Okay, that's how the list was created. The other thing I get from students from, especially years ago, was, well, what happened to this guy dies? What happens to this guy dies? And this guy, and this guy, and this guy, and this, and they keep going down the list. Like, what if all of them die? Well, the U.S. government has thought of that. They really have. So they created this thing called the designated survivor. All right. It's it's made in order to ensure that there is a system of government when a large gathering of government leaders come together. One person is chosen not to attend that thing. So like when the president does the State of the Union address, when there's a inauguration, re-election, re-election inauguration. Um, the Senate, the House of Representatives, Supreme Court justices, the generals, people like that. Everyone's in there. And let's say somebody just wants to blow it up and kill all those people. Okay. Now, if that's the case, then they would have somebody who's way far away and undisclosed location, and they would be the next president. Okay. Documents have shown that this has been going on since the 1960s. Supposedly, this has been going on since the beginning of our country. Okay. Now, I know you're probably thinking, well, were there missiles back in the days of Washington? No, but um, there were gunpowder. And one guy back in the 1500s actually tried to destroy Parliament in England. He tried to put a ton of dynamite underneath the building in the basement and blow it up. That guy's name was Guy Fawkes. All right. And what happened is he got caught. So every year, every time Congress goes into session, police in England actually check the basement. It's still a tradition that goes on to this day and has been done since the 1500s. So the idea of somebody putting dynamite all over the Capitol building, it's plausible. So they have the designated survivor. But we know for a fact since the 60s, there's documentation since the 60s. We don't know about days in Washington. We don't know that, but definitely in the 60s. Now, in the 80s, identity of the designated survivor was made public. So they'll say this person, the official name for them is the cabinet member not in attendance. You know, they'll tell you, hey, this is the person not there. And they'll have them far away, you know, watching the State of the Union address, things like that. But just in case something happens, we still have a president. So here's your next question. Do you think the designated survivor should be chosen by the people or the president? Because if something happens at the State of the Union address or at the inauguration, and this person designated survivor, they're going to be the president. So should we have a saying? Should we the people have a vote in this? If he says the president goes, "Oh, I'm going to want this guy, the Department of Secretary, the Secretary of Agriculture," and we don't like him. Let's say the American people don't like him, but we like the Secretary of Education. Let's say we like that guy. Should we be allowed to vote and say we want that guy instead of this guy to be the designated survivor? What do you think? Should we or shouldn't we? Explain. All right. So pause the video, write your response, okay? Because we're moving on in 3, 2, 1. All right. So here's your exit ticket questions. Remember, you're only going to pick one of these. Since the president has the power to veto, right? Do you think Congress should have the power to veto the president's executive order? You know, like if Congress gets 2/3 of the vote, then the executive order doesn't go through. What do you think? Okay. The second question says, should the president have the power to negotiate treaties or should Congress? Since they have to approve it anyway, since they have to approve the treaties, should do you think they should just might as well handle negotiations or should it be just the president? Okay. The last one says, how much executive privilege should the president have and why? So, how much would you give him? When you say, oh, this is executive privilege. Hmm, where would you draw that line? If it's something like illegal, something that, yeah, you might think something might be like seen as a cover up. What do you think? Okay, so pick one of those, whichever one you feel you can answer better. Once you're done with this lesson. Okay, so good job, guys. Hopefully you learned something new. Hopefully you enjoyed this lesson. All right, I'm going to see you guys later. You guys take care and you be safe, okay?